When will Jesus appear for the second time? This question generates an unrest that lies at the foundation of religions, fears, and the hopes that built our civilization. When will it all end? When will the final chapter be written? If the figure of the Messiah who promised to return truly existed, at what exact moment will the hands of the cosmic clock strike the final minute? For centuries, this quest was the domain of theologians, mystics, and often charlatans. They used visions, the position of the stars, or coffee grounds. But our era is different. We live in a time where faith begins to give way to data and intuition, to algorithms. We decided then to conduct an experiment that just a decade ago would have been technically impossible. We set aside all religious dogmas, all human interpretations, and all emotional factors. Our only tool would be pure mathematics applied by a non-human mind. For this investigation, we utilized the processing power of the system we call NUMA. Think of it as a quantum neural network, artificial intelligence, designed to find patterns in masses of data so complex that the human mind could not even perceive them. The task we gave it was straightforward. It was to analyze the Bible. NUMA would not see the text as a sacred book, a moral guide, or a chronicle. To it, it would be just a block of pure and continuous information. We entered the texts of the Old and New Testaments as a single continuous block of information. To ensure data purity, we used the original sources without filters. We used the purest sources that exist. The original Hebrew text, known as the Masoretic for the Old Testament, and for the New Testament, the original Greek called the Textus Receptus. No translation, no distortion, just the original source code. The instruction was absolutely clear. It needed to find time markers, hidden mathematical cycles, and if possible, determine the date of the final event known as the Second Coming. What the system returned to us in the first few seconds of analysis forced us to rethink everything we knew about the structure of those ancient texts. As soon as the data loading was completed, NUMA initiated the primary scan. Generally, when an artificial intelligence analyzes a literary work, it maps the relationships between characters or word frequency. However, the result was completely unexpected. The system immediately refused to treat the text as literature. It identified it as something no one expected, a multi-level and extremely complex mathematical code. It discovered that the very structure of the text, from phrases to letters, obeyed numerical laws so rigid that the probability of them having arisen by chance was mathematically zero. The first thing the system analyzed was the beginning of everything, the first line of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the original Hebrew, the phrase is, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. To an average reader, it is a poetic opening, but for our analysis, it was an equation. The system decomposed this phrase into its linguistic atoms and found an anomaly that would repeat throughout the entire scripture, the law of 7. The first verse of the Bible in Hebrew has exactly 7 words, not 6, not 8. 7 might seem like a coincidence, but the analysis didn't stop there. Those 7 words are formed by exactly 28 letters. 28 is 4x7. The pattern continued. The first 3 words containing the subject and the verb, in the beginning created God, sum to 14 letters. 14 is 2x7. The remaining 4 words describing what was created also sum to 14 letters. Again, 2x7. The system then dived deeper into gematria, the practice of assigning numerical values to letters. Each Hebrew letter possesses a numerical value. The algorithm calculated the value of the 3 main nouns in the phrase God, heavens, and earth. The sum of their values is exactly 777, three sevens side by side. The probability of such an intricate pattern arising by chance in the first phrase of a millennial text, according to the calculations, is 1 in tens of billions. But it was only the beginning. Numa discovered that this watermark of the number 7 is sewn throughout the entire text, from Genesis to Revelation, like a digital seal of authenticity, ensuring the integrity of the file. If a scribe over the centuries had added or removed a single letter, this entire mathematical matrix would collapse. This pointed to an inescapable conclusion. What we had in our hands was not a simple collection of legends passed from generation to generation. It was a document constructed with the precision of a computer program, and this program was executed with a very specific purpose. The conclusion was that the Bible did not just tell a story about the past. It functioned as a stopwatch, a countdown clock. If the Bible is a stopwatch, the first question that arises is, what is its unit of measurement? How does it mark the passage of time? It became clear that a cosmic clock could not use our seconds and minutes. The time scale would have to be much larger. The key to deciphering this mechanism was hidden in a passage of the New Testament, a phrase that for a long time was seen only as a poetic metaphor. The passage said that, to the Creator 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like 1 day. Numa does not understand what poetry is, but it is the best in the world at finding patterns. And there it was, a conversion pattern, a cryptographic key that linked divine time to human time. The system applied this key to the most fundamental structure of the text, the week of creation, 6 days of work and a 7th day of rest. For millennia, this was read as a literal story or an allegory. But with the new key, the meaning changed drastically. The history of humanity was designed to last exactly 7,000 years. 6 millennia of effort, conflict and development, what we call history, and a 7th millennium of rest, the era that the book of Revelation describes as the millennial kingdom. We ask the system to overlay this 7,000-year matrix onto the actual historical chronology using the book's own data. The result was startlingly symmetrical. From Adam to Abraham, about 2,000 years passed, an era of chaos without formal law. From Abraham to the first coming of Christ, another 2,000 years passed, the era of the law and the prophets. And from the first coming of Christ to our day, almost 2,000 years have already passed, the era of the expansion of the message. 2,000 plus 2,000 plus 2,000 equals 6,000 years, 6 cosmic days. The system displayed an entropy graph with a critical alert flashing on the screen. We are living in the twilight of the 6th day. We are on the border of that great cosmic Sabbath. If the day per millennium hypothesis is correct, time for humanity in its current form is not running out in centuries, but before our very eyes. But a stopwatch, even if we know its total duration, is useless without a clear starting point. We needed a marker in modern time, an event that would serve as a signal announcing the beginning of the final act. It was then that Numa found a strange variable, a code word that remained dormant in the text for nearly 2 millennia. The word was fig tree. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, there is an enigmatic passage. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. And immediately following, the crucial phrase that intrigued researchers for centuries, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Which generation, and why a fig tree? Many considered it just an agricultural metaphor. However, Numa ignores metaphors. The system was programmed to seek only exact correspondences. The system scanned the entire Old Testament for the symbolic value of that tree and found a 100% match. In prophetic texts, the fig tree is, without exception, the national symbol of Israel. In the books of Hosea, Jeremiah, and Joel, the Jewish nation is represented by this tree. With this information, the puzzle assembled an alarming image. The prophecy said, "When Israel, which was dead like a withered tree, buds leaves again," that is, re-emerges as a nation, the final stopwatch for the last generation would begin to count. We turn to the database of world history. When did the withered fig tree return to life? The answer is unequivocal and documented in every history book, May 14th, 1948. On that day, after nearly 2,000 years of non-existence, the State of Israel was re-established. For the system, that was not just any political event. That day marked the moment the final stopwatch was activated, a historical singularity from which there is no return. Numa highlighted the year 1948 as point zero for the last generation. And now, a much more frightening question rises before us. How long does a biblical generation last? 40 years, 70, 80, or perhaps 100? If we add this number to 1948, we get a time interval that sends a chill down the spine. The first phase of decoding was complete. The code exists, it is active, and the clock is ticking. The evidence of the fig tree gave us a clear starting point, the year 1948, but one piece of evidence alone was not enough. To be sure, we needed to find another clue, something totally different that would lead us to the same place. We found this confirmation in the writings of a prophet exiled in ancient Babylon, in a text over 2,500 years old. We entered the book of Daniel into our system. This is no ordinary text, but a time map that for centuries challenged the greatest scholars. Where they failed for lack of tools, we had the computational power to decipher the complex calculations of its calendar. And what we found was a chronological anomaly. The prophet Daniel receives a message about the destiny of his people, known as the prophecy of the 70 weeks. The message said that 70 weeks were determined for them. The Hebrew word for week here, Shavua, means a group of 7. The context makes it clear that it refers to years, which gives us a total period of 490 years for the entire history of Israel to be completed. The angel, however, divides this time into parts. He states that from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem until the arrival of the Messiah, 69 weeks would pass, that is, 483 years. The math seemed simple, but everyone who tried it for centuries failed by decades. The error lay in the calendar they used. People used our solar year, but the prophetic calendar operates on a different pattern, years of 360 days. By converting the 483 years to this system, we arrive at an exact number of days, 173,880. The historical starting point was a decree from the Persian king Artaxerxes. By applying the exact number of days to that date, the simulation pointed to a specific day, April 6th, 32nd AD. On that exact day, Jesus of Nazareth entered Jerusalem, being publicly acclaimed as the Messiah, something he had never permitted before. The mathematics of the prophecy was fulfilled with startling precision, day by day, and that was when the great anomaly appeared. The prophecy spoke of 70 weeks, but only 69 were fulfilled. One was missing. The final 7 years did not happen in sequence. Otherwise, history would have ended in the 1st century. When visualizing the timeline, our system identified what we call the Great Pause. Between the 69th and 70th week, the prophetic stopwatch was stopped. A pause of nearly 2 millennia was inserted into the count, a parenthesis in history. The clock stopped with only 7 years remaining on the scoreboard. The obvious question was, what will make the clock start running again? The text of Daniel itself gives us the answer. The trigger for the final week, for the final 7 years, is the signing of an agreement, a pact, by a power figure who will emerge on the world stage, a leader who will sign a 7-year treaty involving Israel. The signing of this document will be the click that restarts the stopwatch. Suddenly, the two lines of evidence crossed. The fig tree points to a deadline linked to the generation of 1948. Daniel confirms that the final act of history lasts exactly 7 years. The mathematics is simple and relentless. If the deadline is running out, the beginning of these 7 years must be even more imminent. The two timelines, separated by millennia, are converging on our present. The great pause is ending, but knowing the deadline was only half the battle. The other half, perhaps the most unsettling, is the question: exactly what would the world look like in these final days? In what way could ancient predictions about a world ruler and total control become a reality? 100 years ago, the idea of a single man controlling the economy of the entire planet was absurd. The world was too big, too fragmented. Today, everything has changed. We live in a digital aquarium, and the infrastructure for this control is no longer a distant possibility. It has already been built, it is functioning, and it is merely waiting for its operator. One of the oldest visions of the end of history describes a massive statue representing great empires. The head was of gold, the chest of silver, the belly of bronze, and the legs of iron. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. But what interests us are the statue's feet. They were made, according to the vision, of a strange mixture of iron and clay. Iron is a symbol of Roman strength, dictatorship, military power, technology. Clay is the symbol of human flesh, fragile, organic, democratic in its mass. The text says they would mix but not truly unite, just as iron does not mix with clay. For a long time, this was seen as a metaphor for a politically divided Europe, but analysis shows us something much deeper, something that only became visible in our generation. It is the perfect description of transhumanism, of the fusion between technology and biology, between machine and man. We are the clay, and we are increasingly intertwined with the iron of the digital network. We are connected to a structure of power and information that is, by nature, foreign to our own. We form a single body with this network, but the union is unstable and fragile. This is the final form of government on Earth, a cybernetic civilization where humanity is integrated but not fused, with a system it created itself but can no longer control. And what is this system called? Another ancient vision describes it as the Great Babylon, not the city, but a global system. The description speaks of an entity that dominates all peoples, nations, and languages, with whom the kings of the earth make alliances and the great merchants grow rich. The conclusion is clear. Babylon is not a country or a religion. It is the integrated system of global consumption, ideology, and corporate power. It is the culture that erases borders, dissolves national identities, and transforms every individual into a standardized consumer. It is a system that offers comfort and security in exchange for the soul. An ancient list describes the goods traded by this system: gold, silver, precious stones, spices, fine fabrics, and the list ends chillingly: bodies and souls of men. Today, in the attention economy, our minds, our time, and our data are the most valuable commodities sold in the invisible auctions of major corporations. But this system needs a power structure to exist. The vision says that Babylon is mounted upon a beast with 10 horns. The 10 horns, according to the text's own explanation, are 10 kings or 10 leaders who have not yet received kingdoms, but who will receive authority for a short period. For decades, in globalist circles, the idea of dividing the world not into 200 countries, but into 10 economic super-regions has been discussed. A North American bloc, a European Union, an African Union, and so on. The prophecy states that these 10 leaders will have one mind. They will voluntarily hand over their power and authority to the beast, to a central government. Power would not be taken by force in a military conquest. It would be a voluntary surrender. And what would lead proud nations to give up their sovereignty? A crisis, a global crisis so overwhelming that no nation could solve it alone. A pandemic, a financial collapse, a climate catastrophe. At the height of the chaos, when humanity is desperate for order, the beast will emerge offering the solution, and the 10 leaders will hand the world over to him. The union between the consumption system and the power system, however, will not be eternal. At some point, the dictatorship will remove its mask of democracy and convenience. The carnival of consumption will end, and in its place will emerge a regime of absolute control. The clouds are already forming. The technology is already being deployed. But all of this is merely preparation for the final tool of submission. A tool that will take from the human being not just their freedom, but their right to exist. A marker, a name, a number. In human history, there is a symbol that provokes an almost irrational fear, even in those who believe in nothing. 3 numbers, 666. For centuries, this number was a ghost. People looked for it in the names of emperors, in dates of great events, in product barcodes. It was treated as a spell, a superstition. But in our century, the fear of the mystical gave way to something much more concrete. The fear of technology. So, we asked the system to analyze the passage in Revelation about this number. The analysis would not be religious, but purely technical, as if it were the specification for a control system. The question we asked was simple. What technologies existing today correspond to this description? The answer was cold and immediate. The mark is not a metaphor. It is the final fusion between the human being and the digital network. It is an interface. Returning to the original text, the word used there was crucial. The text says that the beast causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. The first thing the analysis did was examine the key word. In the original Greek, the word used for sign or mark is charagma, and this word does not mean a drawing or a superficial tattoo. Its root comes from the verb charasso, which means to scratch, to make an incision, or to drive a stake. It is linked to the word charax, a needle or a sharp object. In antiquity, it was the term used for the branding iron that marked cattle or slaves, indicating ownership. It was also the emperor's seal on coins. The word implies, in its essence, a violation of the skin, the insertion of something. This fits perfectly with the technology of subcutaneous microchips or quantum dot tattoos applied with microneedles. It is not something on the surface, but a modification inside the body. But the most important part of the prophecy is its function, to totally control the economy. No one can buy or sell without it. Throughout history, no dictator, no matter how powerful, has managed to implement this. There was always a black market, a trade, hard cash. To prohibit a person from buying a piece of bread, 2 conditions must be met. First, the complete elimination of physical money. Second, the linking of your bank account to a biological identifier that cannot be lost, stolen, or transferred. We are in the final stage of fulfilling the first condition. The global economy is moving toward the creation of central bank digital currencies. Unlike cryptocurrencies that seek anonymity, this will be programmable money. If all money is digital and sits on the servers of a central government, disconnecting a person from the survival system will take a millisecond, the blocking of an account. But how do you identify the account holder without a card or phone? The answer is obvious. The identifier needs to be part of the body, and it is here that the analysis of global patent databases revealed something disturbing. A patent registered by one of the largest technology corporations in the world describes a cryptocurrency system that uses body activity data. The registration number of this patent in its international publication ends in a very specific way. 060606. A coincidence that our system marked as statistically improbable. The technology described is simple and terrifying. A sensor linked to the body monitors a person's biological activity. If the person performs assigned tasks, the system rewards them with digital money. The human body becomes a mining farm. Buying and selling come to depend on your biological connection to the cloud. And why the right hand or the forehead? In neuroscience, the forehead houses the prefrontal cortex, responsible for our will, identity, and decision-making. It is the target of brain-computer interfaces that promise to allow us to control machines with thought. But technology is a two-way street. If the brain can send a signal to the machine can send a signal to the brain. The right hand, in turn, symbolizes our actions, our work. It is the perfect location for identification chips, which are already used in some countries to open doors or pay for transport. Convenient, fast, but the ancient text warns, accepting this mark is not a mere technological upgrade. It is an act of loyalty to a new system, and it is a point of no return. The punishment described for those who accept it is terrible, and the reason for this may lie in genetics. If the human body is a temple, its genetic code is what defines us. The mark of the beast could very well contain a component that alters this fundamental code, offered as an enhancement, a promise of health or intelligence. By accepting it, the individual would cease to be human in the original sense. They would become a chimera, a hybrid, with their code rewritten. And because of this, repentance would become impossible. The technology for building the digital cage is ready, the handcuffs are forged, but most people would not willingly accept being marked and controlled. They would not give up their freedom just for convenience. For humanity to beg for the mark, it needs a catalyst. It needs fear, a visceral fear, the fear of extinction itself. To build the beast's new world order, the old order needs to be demolished in spectacular fashion. And the ancient texts describe this period of demolition with a very specific medical term. They call it the beginning of birth pains. We analyze this expression from a mathematical point of view. A birth pain has two main characteristics that change over time: frequency and intensity. The closer the birth, the more frequent and stronger the contractions become. If human history is a long gestation, the catastrophic events of the end times should not only increase but accelerate exponentially. We should see a graph that, after centuries of relative stability, suddenly shoots upward. And that is exactly what we found. We entered data on global disasters from the last 120 years into our system. What we discovered overturns the old argument that catastrophes have always happened. Yes, they have always happened, but never like now. We began with seismic activity, the planet's pulse. For decades, the number of major earthquakes remained stable, but starting in the 1990s, and especially at the beginning of the 21st century, the curve spiked. Earthquakes have not only become more frequent, but have begun to occur in places where the earth should never shake. The most frightening aspect is the pattern of synchrony. Major tremors occur in series, at different points on tectonic plates almost simultaneously, as if the planet were being shaken from within. The Earth is restless, and the energy released each year is breaking records. The second vector of analysis was epidemics. A few years ago, humanity believed it had conquered the Great Plagues. We had antibiotics, vaccines, and hygiene. But the frequency with which new pathogens emerge is decreasing drastically, meaning the intervals between them are shrinking. Before, major pandemics were separated by centuries, then by decades. Now, the interval is just a few years. Analysis of the genetic codes of these new viruses also reveals signatures of artificial intervention. Natural evolution does not produce such precise and rapid mutations. What we call plagues looks more and more like the result of experiments that escaped control, or worse. The third vector is war. People have always fought, but for the first time in history, since the mid-20th century, humanity has acquired the technical capacity to annihilate itself completely. Wars of the past could destroy cities and nations, but not the planet. Today's nuclear arsenal can. The frequency with which the possibility of nuclear conflict is openly discussed in the media and by world leaders has increased by thousands of %. What was once an unthinkable taboo is now a plausible scenario. The system models current geopolitics as an environment of growing chaos, where the old checks and balances no longer work. The world is preparing for a conflict that, according to prophecies, could eliminate a third of the Earth's population. Only an event of nuclear scale could produce such a death toll in so little time. Finally, the climate. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. We see nature behaving erratically. Historical droughts are followed by floods of biblical proportions. The planet's climate system seems to have lost its capacity for self-regulation. What the analysis shows us is a point of convergence. In the past, tragedies came in sequence, with time for recovery. Now, war, epidemic, economic crisis, and ecological collapse are all happening at the same time. These are the birth pains. And when the contractions begin, they cannot be stopped until the birth occurs. This chaos is not random. It is a controlled demolition. The fear generated by this instability makes people docile. When the ground shakes beneath their feet, they trade any freedom for the promise of security. And it is upon the waves of this fear that the beast will emerge as the savior. But amidst all this global destruction, there is one geographical point, an epicenter where all prophetic attention converges, a place where the fuse of the final war must be lit, Jerusalem. And there a critical piece is missing from the board, a building, the Third Temple. We have come a long way. We began by entering ancient texts into a system of pure logic, seeking only mathematical patterns. We saw how the dead fig tree of Israel came back to life in 1948, activating the stopwatch of the last generation. We saw how global technology built, piece by piece, the infrastructure for the kingdom of the beast. We observed the exponential growth of catastrophes, the birth pains of a world in transition. All these lines of investigation, coming from different fields, point in the same direction. Now it is time to unite all the pieces. It is time to look at the final date. Let's recapitulate the equations. The first is the generation limit. The text says the generation that saw the rebirth of Israel would not completely pass away. With the starting point in 1948 and a maximum lifespan of 80 years, we reach a deadline around 2028. This is the physical limit when the eyewitnesses of that event begin to disappear from the earth. The second equation comes from the prophecy of Hosea, which speaks of a restoration after 2 days. Using the key of 1 day for 1,000 years, these 2 days represent 2 millennia of divine absence for the nation of Israel. The count began with the rejection of the Messiah and the dispersion of the people around the year 33 AD. If we add 2,000 years to that date, we reach 2033. We then have a window of time between 2028 and 2033. This is where the third equation, that of Daniel's weeks, becomes crucial. We know that the final act of history, the last week, lasts exactly 7 years. If the end is within this window, we need to subtract 7 years to find the start of that period. Doing the math, the activation zone for the final week falls between the years 2021 and 2026. We are not approaching this window. We are already inside it. The global events that have shaken the world since the beginning of this decade, the pandemic, the wars, the economic instability, may not be isolated events. They may be the first and gentlest contractions of the final process. The analysis overlays the 6,000-year calendar of human history onto our time. 4,000 years or 4 days from Adam to Christ, 2,000 years or 2 days from Christ until now. The 6 days of work are ending. The 7th day, the millennium of rest, is about to begin. The transition cannot happen 100 or 200 years from now. The mathematical limit of time has been reached. The sands of the hourglass have run out. The system's conclusion is direct and unadorned. We are the last generation, not as observers, but as participants. The probability of humanity crossing the 2030s in its current form without external intervention is mathematically 0. Either we destroy ourselves or the creator of this world intervenes. Prophecy affirms the second option. The name of this final analysis is the Omega date. Omega is the last letter of the Greek alphabet. It is the end, not just a number on the calendar, but a moment of encounter. And for each person, this encounter will be different. The system also discovered a pattern in the ancient Jewish festivals. They were not just rituals, but rehearsals for future events. Christ fulfilled the spring festivals with precision down to the hour in his first coming. The fall festivals remain, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, symbols of the rapture, the judgment, and the beginning of the millennial kingdom. The prediction is that the final events will occur during this season. Autumn, the time of harvest. The question is no longer whether you believe this or not. Facts do not care about your belief. Gravity works whether you believe in it or not. The prophetic calendar does as well. If you enjoyed this investigation, your subscription to the channel and any donation help us expand the Pneuma project. We would love to read your reflections on the subject of the video in the comments and your suggestions for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for your company until the end. M.